welcome to the Chris Eckert Real Estate Team podcast. I'm here today with Jeff Lowenstein with Independent Exchange Services, and Jeff is going to tell us a little bit about the basics of 1031 exchanges.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So here, before, I know you've got a bunch of slides prepared, but before we get into those, one of the questions I've got, I recently saw one of my accountants, and she was telling me she's seen more 1031 exchanges this year than she's seen in her entire career. So I'm just curious what's going on that maybe cause people to be doing more of those this year.
Sure. That's a great question. Yeah, and I'd say the first half of the year definitely saw a big increase because I think people were expecting the rate change. So I think there was kind of a lot more velocity before the rate change. With the rate change, we've definitely seen a slowdown because people just, if they sell something, they got to go buy something. So the 1031, so it's just a little bit harder to make those purchases, or they're getting an elevated interest rate. So definitely, I think we saw the bump from the anticipation of where we are today in the first about 9 months of the year, and then the last couple of months has kind of slowed down a little bit.
So basically, so what you're saying is some people kind of knew that was coming, or maybe saw the rates start to tick up and said, we got to do something now.
Yep, definitely. We see that with our clients, and definitely saw it, especially on the finance side when they're financing the transaction. Definitely saw a lot more clients that have financed the transaction versus an all equity deal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I know you've got a bunch of slides here, so let me start the slides. Give me a minute.
Thank you. Yeah, Independent Exchange Services. We've been around since 1980. So we're one of the oldest, if not the oldest. I think there's a couple of us out there that are the oldest qualified intermediaries in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So our couple of our founders started it right after what became as the modern exchange, modern 1031 with the Starker case, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
There's been 1031s. It's interesting. People don't realize it's back to the 20s. I think it came about in the 20s.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's been 1031 since then, but they really weren't used quite as they are now, starting in like about 1980. That's really what sort of the strike stone going forward as far as people doing it the way we're doing it today.
Right. Cool. Is that how we're in the right slide here?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, kind of just a general idea of what a 1031 is. Any type of property that's held for investment or trade or business. And then when you're going to purchase something, you're going to purchase a like kind investment property. Then they'll be the same. So that's one of the things that a lot of people misconception is that if I'm selling a single family home, do I have to buy a single family home? No. If you're selling a single family home, you could buy a duplex, a triplex, you could buy commercial, you could buy light industrial. You can kind of change into other things, just so long as it's like kind as far as an investment, right? You're using it for investment property.
So I couldn't sell my house and buy an airplane or something like that.
Right. No, you used to be able to. That was a good point. Right. Yeah, exactly. That they got rid of that a few years ago, maybe about 7-8 years ago now. But that was, airplanes were 1031 eligible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not anymore.
Darn, I guess I missed out on that.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And then really I'll cover. There's 4 main points for a 1031, which I'll cover kind of as we go throughout the presentation. But generally, properly structured 1031 is an investor will sell a property, and then the money's held by a qualified intermediary, and then they'll make a purchase. And then also the misconception is, if I sold one, can I buy 3? You certainly can. You could sell a single family home, say in California, and buy 3 single family homes, possibly somewhere else with that investment. So yeah, you could multiply. And that's mostly what a lot of our clients do use a 1031 for, is to leverage up, right? They're going from a good property to a great property, or they're going from a single property into multiple properties because for estate planning, maybe they have 3 children and they want to have 3 houses. And then once, the estate comes to fruition, then each child is allocated a house, and it's pretty simple for them, for the estate at the end. So there's sort of a lot of estate planning that goes along with 1031s as well. That's a lot of our clients come to us. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you don't want your kids fighting over the property, right? So
exactly.
What better way than to
go buy 3 houses, the same amount of money, and they each get one. So
right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good idea.
So this is really an impactful slide to kind of depict what potentially the tax could be. Generally, when we're talking to our clients, I mean, this really adds up to, I think we were talking, it's somewhere in the 60% range. of what potentially could be taxable or your tax could be. Generally, we're talking to clients, we're working with their CPAs, tax advisors. Just a real easy number to use is 33%. To look at whatever you think your gain's going to be and just take a third off of it. Just that's your starting point,
Okay,
right?
that's huge.
To kind of look at that and go, if I'm gonna, if my gain on something is $1 million, you're looking at $333,000 just off the bat, right? When you start to look at things. So once again, your CPA, tax advisors, they can kind of really hone in on the numbers because they know all of your previous history with the property, your depreciation, where you're at with everything. But if you want to go on a thumbnail, back of a napkin, 33% is kind of a great place to start.
Right.
And just kind of go from there.
So I know you're going to bring this up, but I have a lot of clients in the area that have owned their personal residences for many, many years. And
yes,
these things have gone up tremendously in value. And I'll sit down with them sometimes and I'll say, have you thought about the tax consequences of this? And when you tell these people that, okay, so let's say it's a $2 million house now, and some of them paid $50,000 for so they've got nearly a $2 million gain.
Yeah.
To tell them you might be paying $600,000 or more in capital gains tax, a lot of people decide, okay, either go one of the options you're going to talk about here,
yeah,
or wait till I pass away and let my kids take it, because
yeah,
then there's no tax. So
yeah,
it's interesting that you bring that up about how high the taxes are.
absolutely, yeah. No, it's very good. Yeah, we'll talk about it more, like you're talking about, where you combine a 1031 and a 121 to get really the full benefits of deferral, and it really kind of opens up some options for you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so basically with an exchange, once again, like I said, I'm going to kind of cover some of the basics of it. You definitely, if you're doing a 1031, it's got to be done prior to sale, prior to that transfer of ownership. Okay,
Right.
That's very important. We do have people that call us sometimes, and we closed last week. Well, sorry, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Right.
we can't help you in that case. So much like your business, Chris, with us, and we're same real estate. Prior planning prevents poor performance, right?
Okay.
I mean, really, that's
Right.
one of the keys that we work off of is that with our clients and with brokers and with their tax advisors, they need to kind of assemble their team, almost looking down the road if it's something they're looking at in a year or 2 years or 3 years, because then they can do a lot better planning, and especially like you're saying, estate planning, things like that, to really get the outcome they want from doing like a 1031. Because otherwise, like anything, if it's rushed and they're about to close something and they realize they want to do 1031, they certainly can, and we've certainly helped a lot of people in that situation. But generally, what that leads to is they do that, and then they have to rush to find the property they want to do, and then they maybe don't get the ideal or optimum property that they're looking for. So planning is the key to it. So first step in planning is make sure you open up a QI, open up with a QI before, which doesn't take very much. We're the qualified intermediary,
right.
yeah, and it doesn't take very much. I mean, really, we need just a little bit of basically we work with the escrow companies to get the documentation that's necessary, and then we can have most of our stuff turned around to people in DocuSign within 24 hours. So there's not really a long process. It's pretty quick. And then you must take the sales proceeds once the transaction closes, and the net proceeds from it will come to the qualified intermediary, whoever you're working with, and then they'll hold those funds, and then you will then begin the process of going to identify and find your replacement property. Okay. And then basically with to achieve your 100% deferral, there's some of the things you have to do. First off is you have to purchase new property of equal or greater value. So essentially, if you sell for 1.1 million, let's say just an easy way to kind of back on the napkin again to do your calculation to get to your net sales price. Let's say $100,000 in real estate commissions is on there, right? So your 1.1,
right.
You take off the 100,000, you're at now $1 million net sales price, and that's your net sales price. So that's the number you want to get to on your purchase to get to equal to or greater than. So you want to buy something at $1 million, starting at $1 million, and kind of going up above there. And then once you do that that step, if you complete that, then you will be able to defer 100% of your proceeds that from the exchange or from your sale. I should say, sorry. Good. Oh, and then a big one too that I think this is one that catches people. I know we've talked about this a few times. Is the debt. People think that
right.
when they sell, when they sell something, they think the debt goes away. Well, the debt does not go away. The debt is a component of the exchange and of your capital gains. So that's why we always look at the net sales price, because the net sales price would include any equities coming out of it and any debt that would be part of that, right? So, sometimes people, once again, they sell for 1.1, they have $100,000 sales commission, then they're at $1 million net sales price, and sometimes we'll receive $1 million, right? If it's an all equity, they have no debt, but sometimes we get 500,000 and there's 500,000 in debt. So that's when they go out to look at whatever they're going to replace it with, they have to make sure they replace that debt as well. They can't just use all of their exchange funds, the 500,000, and think that they've deferred all their capital gains.
So just to make sure I follow this, so using that, they're 1.1 million, 100,000 off the top for real estate commissions, and I don't charge that much. So
round numbers.
Okay, they're down. Now we're down to $1 million. We have a $500,000 loan on this, and we clear 500,000. So what you're saying is, I still have to buy $1 million property, which means that 100,000 that's sitting with you goes back into the deal, but I either have to come up with another $500,000 cash, or I got to get another loan for 500,000.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you can inject your own equity into it. That's correct. That's a good point. You don't have to go and get a loan, right? Because you may have had a loan on your original property, but now you say, I don't want to have another loan because you're at whatever stage in life and you just don't want to have the debt on something. You can put in your own 500,000 and then you put in your exchange amount, and then that will get you your $1 million.
Yeah, I think that's very, because you're right. We have talked about that where people are like, I only have to invest $1 million, and you're like, no, actually, I mean, you only have to invest the 500,000 I netted.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, actually, you had debt on this one. You got to replace the debt, so you have to invest more than you originally thought. So that's definitely a good point.
Yep.
Okay. So
no, go ahead.
One question that comes up all the time is, some people are like, hey, I've had this investment property all these years. I've scrimped and saved to keep this place, and now that I'm gonna do an exchange, but sure would be nice to take some cash out of it. I really could use a new truck. And man, I tell you what, some of those F-150s all totally decked out, 80,000, maybe some big wheels or something on $100,000. So can I take $100,000 out of that deal without being taxed?
So you can take 100,000 out, but that would be considered boot. So yeah, that will come back. Once again, this is where we point you to your CPA, and they can do a lot of those run those numbers for you to tell you what that would look like. Whether you have some carry forward losses or you have some other, implications, they'll be able to look at your numbers and they can tell you, yes, take it out. No, don't take it out. Defer it all, or defer a portion of it. And what we normally recommend too, some clients will take the money out up front as the transaction closes. And sometimes we'll just advise them to leave it in the transaction, and they can always get a refund sort of at the end, when their 1031 is done. And that way, if they did happen to go into a bidding war and they needed an extra $100,000, with their exchange funds, then they have it there, and then they've deferred all that, they then deferred all that gain. So it is a good idea to just potentially do it at the end, unless they have to have it at the beginning, right? If it's for a truck, maybe it's not that that immediate of a need, right? But if it was someone that needed it for some immediate purposes, they could take it out at the close of the transaction. But once again, we tell them to just do it at the back end to see if they really have that much kind of left over, and that they decide not to use.
The simple answer is usually I would have to pay tax.
Yeah, exactly. Simple answer.
That's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question I get all the time is, how do I know my money's safe with Qualified Intermediary?
That's a great question. Really good question. So we have fidelity bonds, we have errors and omission insurance, we have cybercrime. So those are just sort of the standard. And you can always ask your QI for a copy of their insurance bonding, right? So they can provide it to you, so you can see their insurance, who they're with, who their carriers are. But then also for us, a big part of it is we're part of the Federation of Exchange Accommodators, the FEA, which is our national association. There's about 500 companies that are involved in that, and we subscribe to a code of ethics with that, and we follow a lot of their rules and regulations, and they bring us all of the updates to the laws, and they're also doing stuff, doing things, with a Congress. So they're doing a lot of lobbying for us and for our clients, on behalf of a 1031 to keep it the maximum deferral that someone could get out of a 1031. So
now speaking of lobbying, I'd heard that they were talking about getting rid of a 1031 exchange, and I guess that's gone away.
Yeah. It's gotten quiet. Let's just say it's never goes away. It sort of always seems to be it's one of those things that always seems to be on the table. And it just sometimes it gets slipped in a little bit higher than other times. So right now, yeah, it's kind of we kind of got past some of the hurdles a few months ago with some of the different things that got passed. And right now, yeah, I'd say it's quiet right now. Yeah. Yeah,
so I can still do my exchange.
It's still going, yeah, it's still going, absolutely. Although a few years ago, so that's a good note. A few years ago, one of the things they did take out of the 1031 exchange that a lot of people used to use was personal property. So that would be like if you had a restaurant and then you had tables and chairs and refrigerators and stoves.
Right.
Those could be part of the 1031, whereas now they can't. So it's only the property. It's only the property itself. You can't have any of the things. So it has to be nailed down, screwed down. Actual property, versus before they used to be able to include personal property. So that is a slight thing that happened. That's been within the last 5 years that changed.
Right when they got rid of my
airplane, exactly. Your jet, you can't do it anymore. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's see here. Rules for identifying replacement properties. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is probably one of the things that is the hardest part about a 1031. Most of the parts of the 1031 are pretty simple. It's just some simple paperwork and getting the process rolling, but the identification part is always the most challenging for our clients. Number one, it's the 45 days, right? So they close escrow on their sale. That's day zero. They have 45 days to identify. It could be there's a method of 3 property rule that you can identify 3 properties and the percentages that you're going to purchase, or they could use a 200% rule. So it confuses people sometimes. Generally, the 200% rule is when you take the sales price of whatever you sold, the 1.1 million, and then you double it, or 200%, you double it to 2.2. Then you could list as many properties you want up to that 2.2 million.
Okay.
So you could list 50 properties if you wanted to, right? And then you could buy any combination of them. You don't have to buy, you don't have to buy all 50. You can buy any combination of them. But generally, 90+% of our clients do the 3 property rule, which is a good,
right.
The first thing we start talking about. And that is where you can put your kind of what you think you're going to buy, and it doesn't have to be in order. You could just list 3 properties, and then you can put sort of some backup properties in there as well, which we definitely, if our clients aren't fully committed, or they think that the first their number one option may not be 100%, then we definitely encourage them to put multiple other properties in there, because if you get past that 45th day and you've turned in that identification form, on day 46, you cannot add or change anything to it. So if you just put 1 property and then on day 47, that property falls through and you're not going to be able to buy it, then basically your exchange is going to fail. So yes, and then it gets tricky. So definitely, have a plan. This is where planning comes in, right? Even before they sell, they should be looking or knowing what they want to target, right? Before day zero, before the close of escrow, they should have an idea of what properties they want to target, and whether it's local, whether it's changing to industrial or commercial, or wherever they may want to move their exchange funds to. They need to do that in advance, prior planning again.
All right. For the 95% rule.
Yeah, that one really isn't used very often, but it's the same kind of thing of the 200% rule. If you list it and then you buy 95% of whatever's listed. So really the most common is the 3 property rule is what majority of the people we work with are going to use. But we did talk a little about there is some passive options. So our clients may come to us with 2 properties and they're thinking about it, but they don't have a third. So they'll list those 2, and then there's a passive real estate investment called the Delaware Statutory Trust, or DST. Now that's kind of come out of the prior years of what used to be TICs. A lot of people, we still can do TICs and things like that. Tenants in common, tenants in common, where you buy a property with like up to 32 or 33 other people.
Right.
It could be 3 people, it could be 33 people. But the DST sort of evolved out of that, where you can reserve a percentage of something like 1% or 2%, and then you can list that as one of your identifiable properties. And then let's say if number 1 falls through and number 2 falls through, generally the Delaware Statutory Trust, your reservation lasts long enough where you can still get into that property. So you kind of save your exchange with adding this other kind of passive income.
Okay. So that brings up a good point. Because I think I asked you before we started the camera here, I was saying, well, one of the things people are running into in the Bay Area is, even though the market's kind of slowed down, it's a little bit more of a buyer's market, people are still getting caught in a pinch where, hey, I've identified 3 properties, and what if I get outbid on all 3 of those?
Yep.
So you're saying have two properties plus a Delaware statutory trust as the third.
Yeah,
Because then you're almost guaranteed to get into that.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It is a great backup because the properties you can get outbid. Generally with the Delaware statutory trust, you have a reservation, you're not going to get outbid for it.
Right.
Right. So it is, it kind of slides in that third slot. It's a nice super backup. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. All right.
Yeah. So when I started off, we kind of talked about it, and really what there's four basic rules of doing an exchange. You start off with the like kind. I touched on that earlier, but you're purchasing investment property, you're selling investment property and purchasing investment property. That's really the like kind rule. Financial structure, that's where your replacement property is going to be equal to or greater than the net sales price of what you sold, right? So the $1 million sales price, the net sales price that we want to get over, equal to or over. And then we just talked about the 45 and 180. We didn't talk about the 180. Let's talk about that real quick. So along the same lines as when you close escrow, that's your day zero. Your 45 days starts there to identify. And then also running simultaneously is your 180 days to close a transaction. So you may identify your three properties within 45 days, and then you have an additional 135 on top of that to close them. Or you may close some of your properties within the 45 days. Some people do that as well. They identify and they close their properties before the 45 days is up. But essentially, the 45 and 180 run simultaneously. It's not like you get 45 and then the 180 after that. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But the 180, I've seen very rarely where clients have had trouble with the 180 closing transaction, right? They can usually get the transaction closed within 180 days. So that's barely, I'd say barely mentioned, but it's the not the worrisome one. The 45 days, that's the one put up front. Put up front, exactly. Right. You don't realize how quickly 45 days can go, right? And then document procedure. That's really what you hire qualified intermediary for, is to make sure that everything is properly done for the 1031 and all the funds are accounted for, and the way that everything is taken care of through the process. And then that's what we'll wrap everything together for you. We do everything on the front end of the sale, or the relinquished property it's called. We'll put together all the documentation for you and provide that to our clients. And then once they make their purchase, whether it be one or two or three properties, 4 properties, whatever it may be, we'll wrap all that together and provide them with the documentation on that side. And then that's all they need really for their CPA tax advisor as well, to provide to them. And then they can take everything, document it, and then they'll update the tax situation, and they'll start their new venture on their new properties. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, tell me about this. I haven't necessarily used this before, so I'm very curious about how do you do that?
Yeah. It's kind of a little known tool in the bag of a 1031. It's great. We do see more and more people using it, and we're working with people, especially in the Bay Area. With high sales prices, obviously, and investment properties, and it's really something for parents and even grandparents can do to help their children and grandchildren. So it's estate planning, but it's estate planning while you're still alive, right? It's doing the right steps and taking the right steps. And the first thing is it's basically you're going to start a 1031 just like you would. You're going to sell your relinquished property. And maybe, it's a point where you're tired of tenants, toilets, and trash, right? And that's what we've talked about, right? And you want to kind of pull back from being an active landlord. And your children are at the stage where they want to get into a house, right? Or you want to help them get into a house. Right. So you can sell your investment property, do the first part of the 1031, and then with them, once again, a lot of planning. With them, you can go into a equity sharing agreement on a purchase for them, which is going to be partially their primary residence, and then the part that you would bring in from the exchange will be your investment portion of it. So the money that they're going to bring in from the exchange, let's say it's $1 million. Let's say they have a son and a daughter. Right. They could take $500,000, put it down in this house, $500,000, put it in this house, right? And these are, let's say, both $1.5 million houses. Okay. So then the kids can come up with the $1 million. Whether a combination of their own equity they bring in and or loan, they can bring in those funds, and then now you have a 1/3, 2/3 ownership, right? And so they've now invested, they've now taken their exchange and reinvested it in an investment property that they're invested in with their children, and then their children just pay them fair market rent on whatever that third would be. Oh, okay. Right. So that's sort of the circle back, right? That sort of makes it all complete. Is that they get the investment. So let's say rent's going to be $3,000. What market rent for a house would be $3,000, and they get 1/3 of that. They get $1,000 that comes back to them. The kids are paying the mortgage, and so they're getting the mortgage, the mortgage write-offs and tax and things like that. So it works out really well because the kids can get into something, or the grandkids can get into something, and the parents can satisfy their need of not being a passive landlord or active landlord anymore. They can go more passive because now their renters are their children.
Right. So that's a great. I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
So
and so much like everything else with the 1031 and the real estate process, just want to be planning. If this is something you're thinking about, contact us, contact you, and start the ideas. Right. You want to get once again a tax advisor. There's an attorney that will write up the equity sharing agreement. So you need to have agreement in place. So there are certain things sort of above and beyond the regular 1031 process that you need to put in place, but they're fairly simple. And you just work with some professionals to get it all done, and they put it in place. Your CPA knows how to account for it because they've been involved in the process, and then you're off and running. The kids have a new house, and you're getting some passive income, to replace what you sold for. The income you're getting from your other investment. So it's a win-win for everybody.
So is this a special type of attorney that you would go to, or is it something that
it is, yeah, no, yeah, we direct them to them. Yeah, there are certain attorneys that handle that, and we do work with one in the Bay Area that has done a lot of agreements for us, and all he needs is basically kind of like us, some information about the process and the program and who's going to bring what, and then he draws everything up and puts all the percentages in, and that's what the CPA uses, the tax advisor uses once they're going to go to do their taxes. So it's it's a great strategy. But once again, do it in advance, right? Start thinking about it today.
Plan ahead
and talk about it. Exactly.
Right. Now here's this next slide here. I'm really curious about this because I have people all the time who, like I said earlier in the video, don't want to sell their primary residence because of the tax consequences. But you're saying that there's kind of a way to get around that a little bit. So why don't you tell us about these two, the 121 and then 1031.
Yeah, they can benefit by combining them, right? Normally 121 is where, let's say a couple, they sell their house and they have a $500,000 exemption from the capital gains, right? That'll port forward to them, and then they pay capital gains on whatever's kind of left over. Well, if you're in a situation where you say, oh, well, we may want to go to a different area, or our kids live somewhere else now, we want to go maybe buy them, someone could, instead of selling right off the bat, selling their primary residence, they could then go somewhere and rent and try it somewhere, and then they turn their primary residence into investment property, right?
So they're renting out their what used to be their primary residence. Going to rent it for
24 months. It kind of is once again, talk to your CPA, tax advisor. That's sort of the starting point, but 24 months at least, and then they can start thinking about doing a 120, getting their, if they did sell it after that point, thinking about getting their 121 exemption. They could pull that out and then purchase, wherever they've gone to, purchase their primary residence down there, and then they could then 1031 the difference. So they could use the rest of the funds, they could defer the tax on that by doing a 1031. And so then wherever they move to, they could buy investment property there. So they've now basically done a 2-for-1, right? It's a double win, right? Because they take this wonderful asset that they had, and they were able to spin it off into being able to get investment property and their primary residence out of it by doing all the proper steps.
So just to make sure I understand that part. So basically, rent my house out for 2 years. Then after approximately 2 years, and then check with your accountant. I'm gonna sell my house. I'm gonna take $500,000 and put it in my pocket because I'm gonna probably buy a place in Phoenix or something like that. And then the other another $1 million, whatever the case is, I'm going to take that amount and do a 1031 exchange into a rental property. I never had one before, so that's how it works.
Exactly. You get a new investment property, exactly. And you can do that in the same area where you were, or you can take it to where you're going to go to. So it makes it nice because you can port it to wherever you want.
Okay, that's another great program that I don't think a lot of people are aware of.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, definitely something to plan for. Once again, it takes a lot of planning, but as long as you plan it correctly, you can execute and utilize both options, the 1031 and 121.
Okay, that's good. And reverse exchange.
Sure.
So the question I get all the time is, okay, so I have an investment property. Maybe I'm loosely thinking about selling it, but all of a sudden this killer property comes on the market. It's a really good deal. And I'm thinking, how do I buy that? I don't have enough time. This is such a good deal. Somebody else is gonna buy this.
Yep.
I don't have enough time to sell my current property, so how do I do that? How do I keep from missing out on the new one until I sell my old one?
Absolutely. It's a great, you're going from good to great, right?
Right.
You found this property, like I said, ideal. It's in the place, the location you wanted. It's the right price. Everything works out. The easiest way to do it is reverse exchange. And a reverse exchange works where you work with a qualified intermediary and we set up a entity for you. Well, we set up the entity and then we
An entity meaning?
meaning LLC, a corporation,
Okay,
state of
right.
California, just sort of depends on what your structure, what you may want to, you can take them over. So you may just take over that entity once the reverse is complete. So we set up the entity and then the entity will purchase this ideal property. So we'll make that purchase and it's generally through equity funding from the client, or if they're going to go out and get a loan, then it'll be through a loan that they're going to then take over once they have the property transferred. Because in a 1031, you can't buy a property that you already own, right? So they can't own, they don't own the property. In a reverse, it's a parking situation. So property's parked with us and we hold it until they go back and they look at their inventory of what they may want to sell from their investment properties. And then it gives them a little bit more time, right? The 45 days and 180 still apply. But really, when you're doing a reverse, since you've already bought the property, you want to buy, the 45 days is kind of a moot point, right? So that doesn't really work.
Okay.
It's 180 days that they have to get the transaction. They get their property sold, and then those funds come back in, and then they'll be what's purchasing that property that's parked.
Okay.
So that's essentially what happens is they go back and they figure out what properties they want to sell. Maybe it's one, maybe it's two. Maybe they want to get rid of all, everything, right? They bought this and it's a commercial building and it costs the same value if they sell all of their other investment properties, right? Which may take some time to do.
Right.
But as long as they can get all that done in 180 days, and then that'll fund the purchase of this park property for them. And it's a good option. Yeah, it is definitely. We do far more forwards than we do reverses, but we do reverses, probably 2 or 3 a week. And, a lot of clients that are, looking at purchasing, or they've come to an agreement with someone and they know that's what they want. And then they have to figure out how to fund it. And that's a way to do it is through the reverse. They can take their time with their investment properties and selling them, right? So not everything is in a rush.
Right.
They just have to meet that 180-day qualification.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
pretty simple.
That's another good tidbit there.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a little bit about you and your partner in your firm.
Ian's our senior partner, and we're always open for questions. Just kind of like we've always talked. We'd love to just talk to people, especially on the planning side. We would rather talk to someone in advance of something than them have to have this crazy situation with only days to make decisions, right? We'd rather help them make decisions months and years in advance, to get prepared. So we're always open for conversations. I know we've done some conference calls with clients and just get everyone on the same page. And we always invite their tax advisor, CPA or lawyer, or whoever they want to get involved. And that way they can make a really smart decision about, is it a good idea to use a 1031? And does it make sense at this point, to do that from estate planning and, all the different things that they're looking at. So we're glad we're here to help. That's really kind of what I can leave you with.
Well, that's why I brought you in, because you're the expert, and what I appreciate is you'll give them an honest answer. You'll tell them these are some options for you, and maybe sometimes you say pay the tax because there's not enough of a benefit in 1031 exchange. So
we've done that, absolutely. Yeah, we've sat down with some clients and their CPAs get on and they kind of look at the numbers and they go, yeah, the number is not that big. The number doesn't scare them to go through the process to do the deferral. Right, they just want to pull the money out and be done, and they're going to kind of move on with things. But yeah, that's a great place to start. Get everybody together and get everybody on the same page.
Okay, well, I definitely appreciate you being here.
Yeah,
and,
thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
We'll look forward to
come back again.
following up on this one.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do some updates. Exactly. There's always stuff changing. So that's one thing is constant. There's always change.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent.
All right.
Great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris.